The History of the Old Brick Church podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's Historic Church and Museum, located in Smithfield, Virginia. As a museum and historic site, St. Luke's focuses on the development of religious freedom and the early American religious experience. This program was supported by a grant from Virginia Humanities.
So it was part of the English mindset initially, I think, in 1607, that they have this Christian mission to convert these native peoples, but they're almost immediately in warfare. So I imagine that the English mindset, as well as the native mindset, probably shifted a little bit. And one of the things that I've just been researching of late is I think that there's a lot of misnomers about when we think about enslaved people. We don't initially think about indigenous people, but it was far more extensive than I think most people realize. Isn't that right?
Right. So it's 17th century is such a tumultuous time for this region. If we were to go to England, we'd see that the whole country is in a revolution mid-century. Here in Virginia, the colonial encounter produces multiple wars, widespread wars. So you're right. I mean, almost as soon as the James Fort is established and that English attempt at colonization of this region puts the Pamunkey chiefdom and the Englishmen who settled James Fort into a war they call sometimes the First Powhatan Anglo War. One I think distinction to make about the English venture into this world is that their church, the Church of England, did not have these arms like the Franciscans and the Jesuits formally within the church. So when they arrived, they brought their clergy, but they didn't have these specialized units of the church that were meant to go out and proselytize. So that role in the Church of England tended to fall with advocates, learned men, and special interests so almost like a private effort. And so we see organizations like the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts emerge as a type of fraternity that the upper class are contributing funding to, that has a relationship with the church, but it's not one where it's within the church. It's one as an adjunct to the official church. So when the James Fort is established, they don't bring Franciscans or Jesuits or anything like that with them. So it is the effort of the preachers to reach out to the native population. And we see one of the very early converts is Pocahontas, who is baptized and eventually marries. And she's probably not the only native person that married an Englishman during those first couple of decades. And so there is quite a closeness. The English talk about the Virginians in the same way they talk about the Irish. So establishing a school early on is one way that they believe that an indoctrination can take place. So if you think about the invasion of Ireland, which happens multiple times, but Trinity is established in 1595, and that one of the purposes of Trinity as a university in Ireland is to educate the Irish into the Anglican Church and to bring them up to the level of civility that the English perceive their position to be. And they talk about the Irish and the natives in that terms of civility and savagery and barbarism, not maybe in the way we think about them today, but that civil society is organized around our version of Christianity and our version of behavior and proper norms. And that has multiple cultural and social implications. But what they're hoping to do is to transform the Irishmen and transform the indigenous population into Englishmen. So in their image, both religious, cultural, and social. And that's probably because they had success in doing it. They had success in multiple marriages between the two. They had success in probably pulling off some of the lower middling sort of community members from the chiefdoms into the English social and living sphere. Some of that was working in the house. Some of it was working in the fields. Some of it was working in employment as hunters or fishermen to bring food to the table for the colonists. And the chiefs saw that they were losing control over multiple areas of their world. They were losing control of some of their constituents. They're losing control of some of their matrilineages. They're losing control of some of their religious practices and belief systems. And it likely was, a combination of these factors that led to the Great Assault of 1622, which was a singular event in Virginia on one day where the native population attacked 100 miles of English colonial settlements on the James River and annihilated probably close to a quarter of the English population, which was upwards of 400 people that were killed on a single morning. And it was from that time of 22 to 32 that a 10-year war was then fought between the indigenous population and the Englishmen that forever changed the way in which English-speaking English people in America interacted with native communities. So what started of the Peace of Pocahontas and that time period of fraternization and collegiality and marriages and church going, 1622 turned that into a type of hatred and violence and warfare and distancing and segregation. That is that the English would then segregate themselves away from, we will never, as they said, have them be that close. They felt betrayed. They felt that they were completely surprised. And they said that would never happen again. So they put a wall up, both physically and socially and politically, between themselves and the native community. So that created an environment that's really set the stage for the next 100 years of interaction between indigenous peoples and Englishmen in the colony. We could take that a little further and see that there was a lull after the Peace Treaty of 32. More population came in, but during the height of the English Civil War, there's yet another great assault, 1644, where the native people try to eradicate the English once again, or at least push them back to the territory of Jamestown. And so it's a series of bloody wars through the 17th century, and the slow erosion of native political prominence, control, slow erosion of the relationships within the chiefdom. So we really begin to see a collapse of the political units of the native polities during the mid 17th century. And part of that has to do with native peoples being in English households, following along with English law, English practices, English religion, and the chiefs and matrilineages losing control of some of their peoples, and that's a political control and a religious control and a social control. And that alliances are made with some English along the way, and the elites of the chiefdoms make those alliances in the treaties that they sign. And so for a time in Virginia colonial society, we do see a tier of native elites and English elites in partnership, so that the chiefs and they call them kings and queens of the Indian towns are on a equal political footing with the governor of Virginia and the clergy of Virginia, that they refer to each other in some cases using kinship terms, or very, very friendly terms. So it wasn't going to be that way forever, we know now in hindsight, but there was a period of time where there was different roles in Virginia for native peoples that included this elite status, servants that were working inside the households that may be for wage, or in some cases, like you said, there begins in earnest through some of these wars that captives taken in warfare are enslaved. And in some cases, those are slaves they're enslaved for a period of time, so 10 years or 25 years, and then they're freed. In other cases, it's life enslavement, and that's a that progresses through the century. It's not a light switch that gets turned off and on. So the distinction between indentured servants and native servants and individuals who have a longer term service for 25 years, for all intents and purposes, is a lifetime of servitude. While it might not have been designed that way, life expectancy made it for service for life. So there is I think probably little recognized from our perspective of the way that chattel slavery evolved in the United States and in Virginia in particular in the into 18th and 19th century. This period of labor and the rise of labor needs in the colony for tobacco and for household that included Europeans, natives, and eventually, towards the end of the century, Africans. And that for a time, there are households in Virginia that we wouldn't recognize from our perspective of what a plantation looks like. We're heavily influenced by antebellum ideas about what a plantation society looks like. But in the 17th century, there are multiple English and Irish and Scottish servants working alongside native servants, native slaves, Africans who are indentured, Africans that are in lifetime of servitude. And when people get together in those small spaces, they make new people. So there's also a tier that develops in the society what we might call of mixed ancestry. Both English and Indian, and English and African and Indian, and so that gets us to a conversation probably about our ideas about about the concept of race, how that developed and how that emerged during the 17th century in Virginia. That's for another podcast, though.